So I've actually got this book now, right? So this is the London Liberties book. It's the Ancient Liberties of London. And I did get it in PDF for free, basically, but I wanted to get the actual book. And this is actually, I think, one of the original ones. This is one of the older ones, I think. And it's just good to have it, to hold it and look through it. Because when I got the PDF, I was mainly interested to find out about the tolls, right? The toll-free London. So I didn't get a chance to read the whole book. And now that I've actually got the book, I've been looking through it at some of the other London Liberties, right? And there's quite a few things that the people for Stop ULEZ campaigns should know and be interested in. The first thing is this, right? There's a lot of people who just switch off when you start talking about Magna Carta. Now, the thing is, the government claimed to have, repealed most of Magna Carta. So there's only really the London Liberties and the right, to a fair trial and jury kind of left in it, really. So therefore, because the London Liberties are not repealed, they're actually one of the things in Magna Carta that are actually enforceable and are meant to be protected by law still, right? They're actually one of the things that are still protected by law and are still supposed to apply from Magna Carta. So you can argue them in a court, right? Because they have not been repealed. So we need to know what they are. Now, it says that London is toll-free. The word toll always was referred to a charge, being charged, having to pay some money, right, for something. It was, they had tolls on all kinds of things. So on the roads, it is for the usage of the roads. Now, the roads were paid for by the taxpayers, and there were certain roads which you could not charge tax on them because they were called the freeways. That's where the term freeway comes from. Now, these were meant to be the major main roads up and down the country, like the A1, Ermine Street, and this Watling Street, right? And then there was another two, but there was four main roads, right? And they crossed at High Cross, which is just below Coventry, a place called High Cross. It's sort of around Coventry and Nuneaton, and they kind of cross paths. The Fosse Way, which is the kind of like from the Exeter, Plymouth, the southeast, which went diagonally up to Lincoln, and then you had the one that went from Kent through London to Shrewsbury, right? But then it kind of did continue to North Wales, to Anglesey, right? Because that's where people in Ireland would travel to London from Anglesey, okay? So those are meant to be the freeways. There's evidence for the freeways and how they collected money from the local people, and it was not the road user. Because remember, you might think, well, everyone who uses the road has to pay the tax for using the road. Like, we pay road tax now, or you can't drive. Well, actually, they saw it a different way. They saw it like people who use the main routes, the main freeways, the main trade routes, were actually bringing things that you would need, right? So if you lived in a town, right, you couldn't have any products, or they wouldn't. If you went to the market, there wouldn't be anything there if anyone hasn't brought it to you, right? So, and that was the thinking behind it. Now, this did not apply off of those main roads, right? In local areas or roads that were small or needed. It was the maintenance for the main roads which brought the trade, right? It facilitated the merchants to come in, or for people to get up and down the country when they needed to travel long distances, right? So those main roads were paid for by the people, not the road user, but anyone could use them. And that basis is actually still meant to be in effect. Now, when they didn't actually bring road tax in till the 20th century, proper road tax for the whole country. Now, this is the thing. So what is going on with these London Liberties? Well, they did not have tolls to get to or through London, that's for sure. Not on the main A1 or Watling Street. You could travel to London without having to pay any money on those roads, and possibly even travel straight through it, like to Dover or whatever. And that's not to say that there couldn't have been tolls when you're going into London, using roads on other routes, right, on the other sides of London, right? But the people of London themselves did not have to pay tolls when they went around the whole country. That was also a privilege. But this King's Peace was meant to be for the whole country, right? It was meant to be all the roads of the whole country. Now, the thing is that, so what else is in this book besides the tolls? So part of the ancient liberties of London are that they can elect their police force. So all the police officers, the constables, are meant to be elected. They're meant to be voted in by the public, right? That's one of the liberties, because obviously you wouldn't choose people to be in the police who you didn't want to be police. Now, another thing I noticed from that book is that there were fees to pay when you went to get people arrested, or if you wanted to prosecute them in a court, there were fees to pay. Now, that means, though, that if you wanted someone arrested or wanted them to be prosecuted, you could pay it and get it done. What's happened now is that we all pay taxes and it all goes to the police. Now, we're funding the police still and we're paying for the police, but it's meant to be a service. So if you ring them on 999, they're really meant to look into it or do something about it. But a lot of the times now, they'll just log it, and not actually do anything, right? You can't force them to prosecute someone. Maybe if you persistently ring and, some people have got the art of, telling the tale or exaggerating the truth. And there's a lot of people involved in more physical, full-on confrontations or issues where there's assaults or injuries. But I've never had the police really prosecute anyone from what I've complained about or act on it. They always say, no, we're not going to do anything, right? Now, that wouldn't have been under this model where you basically go to the police, get the warrant, right? You pay the money. Now you could arrest them or you could get the sheriff to, and then you want to charge them and you got to pay for it, right? So it was pay per job. So if you want something doing, you paid for it and you bloody well got them, you paid them to basically do it, right? Even though it was, like the King, Sheriff and so forth all sworn in. This is, it's, you paid them to do it and they did it, right? So there's none of this sort of like, log it and I'm not going to do anything business now, where they can just like log it. They don't, and a lot of, when there's like, corruption in, possibly even the government or even some of these businesses and so forth, just ring up, Action Fraud and leave it with them and they do pretty much nothing, right? So it wouldn't have been like this whole kind of like the police now just basically can choose what they want to do and what they don't want to do, right? If they didn't do any jobs back then they wouldn't get any money because you won't pay them, right? You pay them money to do a job, right? And then they do it. So, and they're elected, and if they didn't do the job, then you won't vote for them next time and they wouldn't get the job, right? Now they're getting all God knows what kind of medals from Charles, right, and from the government and from the senior police are handing out all these knighthoods, medals and so forth. Oh, didn't you do well, save the burning building? All these things, but a lot of them aren't. They're not serving the public. They're not doing things that we ask them to do, and and a lot of some of these things are like freak incidents, like Stephen Gallant happens to be on London Bridge. What a coincidence! Now there's a terrorist and he saves him, and now he gets a pardon, right? Oh, what are the chances of that happening? It's like, where's Shakespeare? It's almost like lights, camera, action, right? You know what I mean? It's like the monkey out of the cage and run across the bridge. It's like where's Arnold Schwarzenegger? Lights, camera, action, go. It's like, let the lizard out of the box or whatever. I'm not knocking Stephen Gallant, but, if there ever was a stage setup, that has got to be one of them, right? So, yeah, I mean, if the police, right, back then, the basis of it in London is like, you don't pay them any money. Because if they're not going to do it, then you don't pay them, right? So can you imagine now, if you were ringing the police up and they were saying, oh, we're not doing it, right? We say, what? Well, I'm not giving you any money then. And then you ring up the government and say, right, you can take my tax money away from the police. I'm not paying them, right? And then the more and more people that they say, we're not doing it, then they don't pay them any money. And then, what funding the police are getting now that starts to go down, if you gauge it by a meter, like a needle, a meter, sort of like, how much money they're getting, right? Say, well, they didn't do this for me, they didn't do that for me, they won't look into this, they won't do that, they won't prosecute Keir Starmer, they won't investigate corruption in the Electoral Commission, they won't investigate these elections which are rigged or staged. I'm not giving them any money. And then every single, like people say, no, we're not going to pay as council tax. So we say, well, we're not paying police, we're not going to pay them. We're not paying them. All they're doing is running around chasing feral creatures, and they're not even British citizens. All the police resources, and then we're not paying them to go to any protest because that's our right to do it, and they shouldn't even be at protest anyway. Zero police should be at protest because they can't arrest anyone because it's illegal to arrest them, so why would they be there? They need to be, there's 500 officers who shouldn't be at a protest. They should be looking for criminals, right? Or chasing these, feral creatures around who aren't even in the country legally, right? Which, now we've got to be paying them to do that when, who let them into the country, right? And then because they weren't doing the job to keep them out of the country, the Navy, we're not going to pay the Navy, right? We're not paying the Navy because the Navy aren't sailing boats around and around England in circles, forming a protective barrier, stopping all these immigrant boats coming over, so we're not going to pay them either, right? In fact, we shouldn't even be paying for weapons to be built, right? Why should we? So that's the basis, If you want, someone arresting, then you go and pay. You go pay the police and then they go do it, and then you pay them for prosecuting them, right? Or if you want a writ issued or whatever, right? This is the thing. So that's the basis of it. And if they aren't doing the job right, then they don't get the job. They don't get the job. So like Mark Rowley, you're sacked, right? We vote them in. So if Mark Rowley isn't doing what we tell him to do, like forget Keir Starmer, I could not. If Keir Starmer tells Mark Rowley to climb a tree, right, or put his head in the floor like an ostrich, right? We are voting these police in. We elect them, right, and then we pay them to do a job, right? Now, if they don't want it, get another job. But all we see Mark Rowley doing now is, I'm meeting with the Prime Minister, I'm meeting with the Prime Minister, I'm meeting with the Prime Minister, I'm meeting with the Prime Minister. Senior officers, when we're meeting with the Prime Minister, what equipment can we get? We want these cameras, we want, who's paying? Just a minute. We're not buying you any cameras. You're not doing what we ask or tell you to do. Why haven't you arrested Tony Blair for setting up the deals for justice against the oath, setting out a war, This is the thing. There are 1 million signatures, right, that want Tony Blair as knighthood removed in the forfeiture committee. Matt Rowley's name should be added in on there as well, right? So, if you're not doing the job, then you are not going to be a police officer because you will not have a job, because you will not get elected, right? Forget all this, 1800s, they were asking brave young men to come forward and, they were getting sworn. You could pay money. They started, if you paid them some money, you could get sworn in, right? No. The Liberties of London are that the police are elected, voted, right? So I don't know where all this, signing up to the police and police colleges come from, right? Because none of those police officers should be working unless they were elected, right? So that's in the London Liberties as well. Now, as for the traffic, right, so congestion charge. The idea behind the congestion charge is that they're trying to make out it's not a toll charge. It's not like they're trying to make out that, it's the equivalent of, loads of vehicles blocking the street, therefore it equates to a fine because they're obstructing traffic, therefore they can charge them for it. It's not a toll, it's more like a fine for everyone piling in and blocking the streets up. Right, so what this book actually says about that is this, right? So for business within the City of London, for like taxis and carriages, and they called them chairs, right? So that's how many taxis can you have working? How many buses can you have running? How many, private chairs can you have? That's controlled, right? So they were only allowed to have a certain maximum number of operating services to stop it from being too busy, right? Now, what they've done is they've got greedy and they wanted everyone to, let's encourage business and commerce, and they've actually stopped putting a cap on it, right? So they've allowed it to become too busy with too much business, and then everyone else is getting charged for coming into London, right? Now, if they were not allowed to have too many cabs and too many buses and too many coaches and too many businesses working in London, then that you can't get congested because you're not allowed more than so many cars working. But if you think about it, who's got the priority then? That means that if you live and work in London, right, you've got you don't have to pay a toll, right, to use the roads, but there are still offences, remember. Let's separate offences and crimes, right, are separate from being charged for passage and usage of the roads, right? So if your wheels are too wide or whatever, and all these different specifications, right, or too narrow or whatever, or now, so usage of the road and passage on it, right, is not to be charged. So that means that if London is not too busy ticking over of its own kind of like daily business or functions because you've got a capped limit on it, that means that it's never going to get congested. Now you say, well, what if everyone goes to London? Well, that's the point, right? If London is not congested of its own daily operations because there's a cap limit on how many businesses and what people can do live there, right? Then that means that then there's space and room for people to come in. So that means that it's actually not on the visitor. The visitor must be given way to be allowed to come into and through London. Why? Because they're bringing the produce in, right? And it says that the merchants have got a right to come and bring their wares and produce without being obstructed or hindered, right? And that's the whole point of the whole King's Peace around the whole country, right? And not being charged for using the roads because they're bringing something in that we need in trading, right? Now, so therefore, if you're bringing something to London or passing through it, you need to be able to pass through unhindered and to bring things there, right, without being charged. But what they're doing now is charging everyone and anyone for going in because apparently we're the ones who are blocking it up. Yet, it's actually the people who live in London who are meant to have a cap on themselves, but not to be charged for usage and passage of the road. The fact is that you can't have too many things or people operating. And that's, I think, where they've gone wrong. And the congestion charge, what they've wrongly done is put it on people who are coming in and they're bringing the things that they might want or need or getting through. Because, you're actually allowed to pass through. Now, I know they've got the M25, but they've banged the Dartford crossing on there. Now, if you want to say, well, look, right, London's too busy, and I know that the main route to Dover is straight through London on the A1 or A5, but, could you do us a favour and go around if you're going there? Well, then why are they charging us on the Dartford crossing? Because then you're using that King's Peace freeway to get to Dover, so why are you getting charged on the Dartford crossing, right? That's the deal. So that's another scam going on there, right? So actually, it is meant to be free toll passage on the A1 and Watling Street to and through London to bring commerce, bring your business or travel, because you're meant to be able to travel to Dover from, Edinburgh without having to pay any money on the road because you're already paid for by everyone else, right? So that's the other part of it. Now, so it's actually not all about just Londoners who live there. Londoners who live there are meant to be capped and regulated, although they're not meant to be charged for travel in and about the city, and they don't have to pay for tolls around the rest of the country either. But remember that no one had to pay for passage on the main roads because there weren't any tolls on there, but for the rest of the country off-road, Londoners had a little special privilege, but we had the special privilege only on the main roads to and through London, right? But the people from London had a special privilege for the entire country, all of it, not just on the King's Peace, like all in between and in the thickets and everywhere, right? That was their privilege, because it was like a little bit of a trade-off, really. You know, if people don't have to pay for the freeways to get to London and through there, right, on the main roads, then the people from London, in exchange, don't have to pay for, you know, you going where they want in the rest of the country. It was like a little bit of a swap, really, you know. But everyone else in the country had to, if you weren't for London, if you weren't on the main freeways, then you did have to pay, right? So that was a bit of a swap, a bit of a trade-off. And then, right. So with the vehicle, right, so I think where the London City Corporation are coming from on this and the government is that, okay, so, right, so this whole basis of, you know, like, the vehicle has got to have certain specifications, like the wheels cannot be too wide or too narrow or whatever, or else you get fined. Now, if Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, and the government think that, well, all these vehicles, right, now they're polluting the atmosphere, even though that, you know, we encourage people to buy them and they were perfectly okay, you know, 5 years ago. Now we say they're not, just with a click of the fingers, and we force people to sell their own property, which they love and cherish, right? That's clearly not right. You can't just do that to people's property, you know, because then you're in control of what people can and can't have and what they like and don't like, and in fact you're taking their possessions off them and deciding basically what things they, it's like, you know, you can't have the Prime Minister saying, right, you know, everyone's going to have this wallpaper in their house and you'll have to have this sofa and that, you know, like, whoa, just a minute, you know, what happened to personal taste? Well, you know, it's the taste of the Prime Minister now, you know. No. So they're trying to pass it off like, oh, well, the vehicles are like somehow, now that they're not conforming to these certain specifications of, you know, fuel and pollution and so forth, we're going to say that, you know, they're effectively not allowed in there, in the same way that, you know, carts with certain size wheels weren't allowed in there. So you're going to keep getting fined all the time. But it isn't actually like that. What it actually is that it's turned into like just basically road charges for using and passage on the road, right? Because, you know, they can't, I don't think they can suddenly say, like, you know, oh, like, you know, suddenly everyone who owns a car in London, now all your cars are illegal or whatever. You know, that's just absolutely ridiculous. And using outrageous fines to prize them off people. Now, that brings me to another one of the London Liberties, which is that it says that because the London Liberties are set in statute law, right, any other statute which is created, which tries to take those liberties away, can be challenged with the Liberties of London, right? Now, that is in the same way that, you know, the right to petition says that it's our right to petition the king and all prosecutions for doing so are illegal, right? Even, you know, like, you know, the police kicking a door down or, you know, shouting out something which might be abusive or whatever, but if you need to shout it out, or, you know, defamation or liable or whatever, you know, you're using the statute, the right to petition, to protect you, even though there are all these laws being made, you can't be prosecuted by them, right? So you're using the right to petition to stop yourself getting prosecuted, okay? Because you're using it for a legitimate means and purpose for legal proceedings, right? You know, not just like the police, you know, have got legal proceedings to catch criminals, right? So what they're saying is that the ancient liberties of London, if any law or enactment is made which might sort of contradict them, then you can actually use them in the same way like you use the right to petition. So that means that you can say that, right, Sadiq Khan brings in all this law of the congestion charge, or, well, he didn't do that. Ken Livingstone did that, but of ULEZ, right? The Les and ULEZ charges. It actually means that you can use the London Liberties as a privilege to say, just a minute, actually, the statute says that, we're not meant to be charged for riding on the road, right? You're not meant to charge us for riding on the road. Because we don't have to pay any tolls or charges, so it can be used to challenge it, which it hasn't been done, unfortunately. And that's the thing; it's meant to be used to kind of challenge some of the new things that go against it. I mean, there was with this wheel width, the wheels have got to be a certain width and made out of wood, not metal, because then they end up, digging tracks in the road and kind of like carving trenches into the roads or whatever. There was a London Liberty to do with, tipping pollution into the city, but I don't think that, driving your car around, which has been perfectly okay for the last 10 years or whatever, is the equivalent of dumping a load of, swill on the pavement. It's different, or air quality. This is the thing. Suddenly declaring that, suddenly making a declaration that, now, as of tomorrow, we decided that all these vehicles are illegal and it's going to be a fine or offence, charge for using them, right? But this is the thing. They're not illegal in the city, are they? Because people who live in the city have got those cars or might want them, right? So this is the thing, what Sadiq Khan is this is when I'm trying to do this driveway thing, so, like you're not allowed to, have things on driveways and that. He's trying to take people's things off them and tell them what they can and can't have, right? I don't think, right, that if the government sold them these vehicles and if they were happy to take people's money off them, right, to make taxes and profit off people and encourage people, all these car sales places at the sides, the roads and that, and then suddenly they say, no, all those cars are illegal now, you'll have to sell them and buy new ones. Oh, well, that will be good for car manufacturers. Now they can make loads of business, right? It's not kind of like, the roads are getting trenches in them and they're going to massacre them. It's the pollution's a bit bad, but all these factories will still have to carry on, knocking out chemicals and so forth. And Elon Musk can carry on banging out, chemicals out of his new, microchip factories and all that. It's, what they're actually doing is those vehicles are not illegal, because if they were not lawful and if you couldn't have them there, then they would actually be, they would have to like go around the whole of London and, tow away everyone's cars to the scrapyard, because they won't be allowed to be within that vicinity or area, even if you're not moving it, right? And that's not the case. And I don't think that they can make those cars illegal, because people might want to keep them, to have it as a keepsake or vintage thing, or for many purposes like that. It's a ridiculous notion. I think the argument for the congestion charge is probably stronger, because for removing the congestion charge is because that it was the people of the city, right, who weren't allowed to have too much business, right? Not the merchants. They actually wanted more merchants to come in to bring more things. That's why they had to keep a limit on the traffic of the people who lived there and the business, so they could get people to come in and come through London, right? Now, they already diverted people around London to get to Dover, which is a King's Peace route, and they slammed the Dartford charge on them. That's if your freeway route to London on the Watling Street or A1 is meant to be free and part of the King's Peace, then you shouldn't be paying that Dartford crossing charge, and you're doing them a favour by not going through the middle of London. So why you would get charged for that when they built you a nice tunnel on a bridge so to reduce traffic in London, so that people who were using their free right to the King's Peace didn't have to go directly through London, but it's symbolically the same thing, then you will be doing the government a favour by not taking your vehicle into London, because you're going to Dover and not going directly through London, so you're doing everyone in London a favour by not making it more busy. So why are you getting charged on top of that for the Dartford crossing? I don't fucking know, right? Now that leaves that people who want to go into London to bring business, commerce, goods, merchandise, which everyone loves, in the posh shops in the middle of London, or they wouldn't be having anything there to sell, right? But then now they're getting charged, right? When they're meant to, and then, so visitors, people, so but they're giving people these, the Liberties of London little magic slip from the mayor to the people, the residents of London, but they're the ones who, are meant to be restricted, but apparently, they were allowed to, boom and blossom. And now, if they would have not expanded the city too much and exploded industry and been too greedy, then they wouldn't have this problem. And what Sadiq Khan's wanting to do is, get rid of the smog, he's wanting to reverse it all, right? When he shouldn't have done it in the first place, right? That's the genius plan of it. If they hadn't have, they can't control themselves, right? And what they're doing is they're actually blaming the people, but yeah, it's the government who allowed, passing planning permission, more businesses, because greed, right? And now they got a problem. So the government's to blame. It is the government to blame, and they're what they're actually doing is punishing the people. They're punishing the public, right? When it was the government who was like, buy these cars. In fact, we'll encourage you. And now they've even got it on YouTube, you're trying to watch a video and they're allowing all these adverts that are upsetting and annoying people. We'll sell more things, do more adverts, take more time from people. When actually, this is the problem. And what they're doing is, Facebook, YouTube, thinking this is a good way to control people's behaviours, right? And we're going to get the headset on them, but we're going to control people's behaviours through these, new devices or whatever. But they haven't learned from their mistakes. Basically, they haven't learned at all. So congestion charges actually meant the regulation of the volume is not on the visitor or the merchant who's coming in. It's they're actually the one who's got the free passage and who are meant to be, welcomed in for a purpose or reason. And then you've got the King's Peace, which is the passage part of it, right? So we shouldn't be being charged. The visitors should not be being charged. And, if there's too many people going in, welcome to, they wanted it to be too great, right? Who doesn't want to come to London? All the museums are there, all the historic places, the castles, all of the posh shops, all of the restaurants. They sold the place to everyone that, you want to come there because it's so great. And then it got so busy that then they were actually breaking their own rules and constitutional law. And then you can't actually get through London to get to Dover, which is the whole part of the whole thing, right? And then the merchants are struggling to get into to business. And then the whole thing's cocked up because they want it to be too good. It's kind of like, it spoiled it, basically. It has spoiled it. So the congestion charge definitely is not meant to be on the visitor or people who are coming to bring... if you're going into London to buy an expensive book from an expensive bookshop, then you shouldn't have to pay a toll charge to get in there to do it for the privilege of doing it. Because it's on the freeway. Because you're bringing your business to London. You're travelling there to go to that shop because merchants came there to bring exotic things, and then you're giving money to that shop to make a profit, and you aren't to be charged for that because you're doing them a favour. It's trade. So I don't think the congestion charge is lawful and there shouldn't actually be a charge, because if you're what they're doing is, what the congestion charge is like, this is great. We can have as many as we want, and whatever is over the capacity, we'll just start charging them and make money out of it, right? Or it'll deter people. But actually, what they should have done is said, right, this is the limit. That's what you're allowed, and no more. And you can't have any more, right? For what's actually there of itself. And there is no overcharge. But, that's not going to make them any money. All it's going to do is regulate and control it so it's not too busy. They don't want to regulate and control it so it's not too busy and not make any extra money out of it. That's a problem, right? So instead, we'll make it super mega busy and we'll make an absolute killing out of it, right? Illegally, which is the wrong way to do it. And then, when it comes to the vehicles, if they start making new vehicles and encouraging people to get them, okay, but not actually charging them outrageous fines and making their vehicles suddenly kind of like, prohibited or whatever when they encourage them to buy them, And if certain particular people want to keep them because they cherish them or like them, then, this is the thing, if Sadiq Khan, if somebody went around to Sadiq Khan and said, you can't wear that tie anymore, mate, or that shirt, want to wear a pink shirt, or, want to wear a fucking yellow shirt, he won't like it if people are telling him what to wear. Maybe maybe Sadiq Khan should, his new uniform has to be like, polka dot boxer shorts and a fucking, life jacket, or something like that. Marty McFly, Back to the Future, we'll tell him what to wear. You can't wear that shirt anymore, Sadiq. This is, a no pink shirt zone. You have to wear brown socks and, a pair of wellies or whatever. We'll tell him what to wear. And we'll take all his clothes off him. He'll have to sell all these clothes now, Can't have those in London. He didn't like it. And what the thing is that he's actually telling people how they should dress and what they should wear now, right? And, what things they should have. And that is not liberty at all in any way. The liberties of London are meant to, make London operate smoother or better. It's never going to operate smoother or better when they spoiled it anyway and made it too great, And the citizens are having to pay for it now. So you can actually, what it's saying is that those liberties can be used and argued as an immunity. Now you could even say that on that king's the Londoners not having to pay tolls around the rest of England is particular to them, right? It's one of the things that they get when they get the little ticket. But for us to go to London, and we're allowed to go there without being charged. So it might have been that if you were going on the King's Peace to Dover, right, and you happened to have a car and it didn't happen to have a certain width wheels, and you didn't happen to have two horses, and you didn't conform to those city limits, you might have been able to use that King's Peace liberty for the Watling Street in A1 to get through London without being charged, right? I think that is likely a basis of it if you stick on that main road and don't go off the main roads now for other parts of the city in London, right? Which of the locals would have had to have those specific carts, but it could not. I don't think it applied to the King's Peace, to the A1 and Watling Street to get to Dover, because then everyone in the whole country would have had to have those specifications. So it's likely that, that A1 that went straight into and through London, you didn't probably have to have those specifications on vehicle, because then everyone in England would have had to, what are you going to do? Like, stop on your way in and get your wheels changed. So it seems to me that it wouldn't have been on the one main kind of like main road through and out. I don't think it did. If you went off that road, I think it probably would. That makes logical sense to me. So that, I don't think that, but, Dartford Crossing is meant to take precedent on that. And then they did it on the Cannock as well at the M6 Relief Road later on for another symbolic massacre of it. So, I know that Henry of Huntington wrote about it, and I've got this book here. It doesn't go into too much detail, but I think there's enough to piece together now what is likely. It's unlikely that if you had the free right of King's Peace on the A1, right, for the full length of the country, or from Ireland on Watling Street, it's highly unlikely that if you're coming from Ireland, right, they make you fucking change your wheels, right, when you get to London. I doubt it, right? But they're not going to want you to be running around all around the city. Maybe it would be that if you packed your coach up or something and you wanted to look around other parts of the city of London, then you would get a cab or taxi and not use your own carriage. You know what I mean? So like almost kind of like or if you was, but if you're going straight to Dover, you're only going to be. You might be stopping for the night in London or briefly, right? And they might have certain places which are not off the beaten track, So I'm starting to get more of a picture of how it probably was meant to operate, particularly now I know that it was the people who live within the city who they couldn't just do what they wanted when it came to business. There was limits on them. It's not on us, the visitor or the merchant. In fact, through this book, there's a lot of freedom for merchants to come and go without any hassle or having to be charged certain passages or whatever, because they wanted to encourage them to come in and bring their things, right? But now the government is, rather than encouraging to nurture the businesses in the city, it's trying to make its own kind of money out of it, on top of it. And this is where you get to things like, all these parking meter scams and things like that, and, all crooked councils, crooked local councils, crooked governments, and this is where it all comes into the legislation getting perverted and crooked, when there is this. I've got petitions from mayors of London in another book, which are like, they're talking about the mayor of London complaining that the ministers and the government are, breaking the privileges by bringing some of these laws in. And so a lot of the mayors of London were really against a lot of things the government were doing, right? And that is actually what it says in here, that you can defend the liberties of London against certain particular acts and laws which are coming in, right? But now it seems to be that the current mayors of London are the ones who are wanting to basically, scrap the liberties. But the liberties were keeping it healthy, they were keeping it sort of like, they were encouraging the city, but to keep it all running smoothly. And I think that clearly they sort of like, I think it just like exploded too big, it just boomed too much. And now this Sadiq Khan reckons that he's wanting to try, quieten the traffic and do all these things, to make it more run smoothly and, reduce pollution. But we know that the reason that all those things are a problem is because just because it overshot the mark, in all aspects, and which is a contradiction to the privileges. And now, in fact, they're having to break the privileges because they messed up, and they're clear. Everything they're doing now, the big pitch is that we're trying to reduce. Well, but why are you doing that? Because we had too much. Interesting, But that's what the London Liberties were doing, trying to, stop you from doing too much. But then you did too much, and now you're having to break the London Liberties, claiming that because you try to make it run smoother, which is what the Liberties were supposed to do, right? So don't come to London. No, we don't want anyone to. We don't want anyone to come to London anymore, right? We don't want your business, right? Well, fuck off then, right? It's the thing, and the whole police thing is comedy. It's a joke, Never mind getting given medals and awards and knighthoods on the police. You won't be a police officer if you aren't doing the job. You won't get paid. You won't get any money. I mean, people are being boycotting all this council tax. I think one of the best privileges of London to claim now in the courts, and that people in London don't have to pay the police if they're not doing their job properly, right? And none of those police officers are police officers because none of them have been elected, right? If you're going to claim Magna Carta and the Liberties of London and say that some of these new laws were brought into effect, I'd say that all of the Metropolitan Police Acts are void, right? Because you can't be a police officer unless we voted that you're a police officer, right? So all those police officers in London aren't police officers, right? You're not police officers because not one single one of you was elected or voted for, right? So clock out and fuck off, right? To start with, and don't come anywhere near any protests because if you arrest anyone, it's illegal, right? And you're not getting any money, right? Mark Rowley, never mind not paying your council tax. I would say that I would go into court and say, right, the Ancient Liberties of London say that, right, we have to pay per job on policing. They get paid per job. And all these new acts are illegal. Every single act, of these new modern policing acts, they're all illegal because what that's happened is the police now have become a regime, a militarised force who are just taking our tax money for granted and doing with it what they want, and they're even lobbying for things that they want to do, and they're actually being guided and steered by these senior officers, and they're going to the government. We want this, we want that, we want these cameras, we want tasers. No, you're not having fuck all. You're not having anything, right? You're not having anything. If someone rings up and says, right, someone's done this or that, right, you will do it. And if you don't do it, then I'm not paying you. You are not having any tax money from me. And then, next time, you go buy some bread, you say, well, it's £5.60, 20% tax or whatever. I'm only paying, 18% tax because the police aren't doing their job and they won't investigate anything when I'm ringing them up, right? That's the basis of the London Liberties. And, by the way, there aren't any police because we didn't vote for them. None of these police are elected, and I wouldn't elect that police officer, that police officer, that police officer, or that one. They're not having my vote because they're just sweaty shirt, they're muscle flexors, It's like, you report a crime in West Yorkshire, they pass it on to Manchester Police, and Manchester Police ring you up, and, I'm sorry, my shirt's too sweaty, and I ripped my shirt, it's like Hulk Hogan, the Hulk, I picked up my coffee and I split my shirt. My muscles are so big on my arm that my shirt split. And look, I popped a button on my neck. My neck is like a bulldog's neck. My neck's so muscular. Muscle man. Military muscle man. He's like, wrestle me. Are you gonna go investigate this crime? No, I'm not. No, I'm not. But I just reported it. I'm not doing what you say. I want to wrestle you. It's like Churchill dog in the back of the car window. Nod. No. It's like, wrestle. Let go of the bone. Let go of the bone. Drop it. No. This is the thing. They won't do as they're told. So the police are meant to do as you tell them, right? That's the basis, right? Like stand up, sit down, jump, turn around, pick up the ball, right? This is it, right? Now, I'm directing the police, I command you, but that's not the case now. What this is, it's all like we've got Star Wars, Clone Wars now. It's like they're all under the control of the Prime Minister. It's like the Prime Minister says, Simon says, clap your hands. Keir Starmer says, arrest everyone who supports Palestine. Keir Starmer says, hop on your left leg. Keir Starmer says, hop on your right leg. Now, we're going to get all the cameras everywhere. Now, Keir Starmer says, go down to, Marylebone and, arrest everyone. Keir Starmer says, don't investigate MPs. Keir Starmer says, don't prosecute the Electoral Commission. Keir Starmer says, go after corrupt businesses, This is what Jonathan N. Fuller is talking about, reporting a lot of these very serious sort of like crimes against the people on these big companies, like poisoning people with foods and all these type of things that they won't investigate. Yet, if they don't investigate them, they're sacked. In fact, who would elect them in the first place? So, this is the thing like with Extinction Rebellion and Jonathan M. Fuller. They're doing these legal cases where the police aren't doing what they're told. But, you see, according to London Liberties, you are actually... that, it's pay per job, you sort of, what this doing, it's like you get a plumber, even though they're sworn in for service, but they're not like directly under the instructions of Charles or whatever, or some kind of inspector of police. He was meant to be like, they're all sworn in as a police, but they're meant to be under the direction of the public, but they're not now, and they're wanting to try and